Hello, everyone. Titus 2:4, which says that mothers, or actually older women, are supposed to teach the women to love their husbands and their children. And I'm going to focus on teaching women to love their children. And if you watch my first episode, explains why I feel like at this point I should say something at this point and help mothers out there that would like to hear some advice from a grandmother who has taken care of a lot of children. So this one, I would like to give you some ideas about what grandmothers for all time have passed down, mothers and grandmothers. So what do you do when parents have different philosophies as to raising children? What I have seen more of, and not to say that the other doesn't happen because it happens a lot, but what I have seen more of is the father wanting to be strict and the mother not wanting to. And this is really not going to be about spank versus not spank, timeout versus not timeout. That's really not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is something a little bit broader. When you are getting married, we sat in marriage counseling before we got married, just because our church, I think, recommended it or something, or we had some family members that recommended. But anyway, so we went to counseling before we got married just to make sure we're on the same page. But that's kind of silly because you change once you have children. You think you're going to be a strict parent, you think you're going to be a certain type of parent, and then you actually have a child, and then all your preconceived notions jump out the window. And so it's not really something you can do. Of course, let's just say somebody's had lots of brothers and sisters, and they helped raise kids, and they have been around a lot of children. Maybe a teacher or something, for of small children, and she knows or he knows how they want to raise children, and this is something they've thought about. Okay, that does happen, but generally, they people just look in each other's eye. No, whatever you say, whoever has the strongest opinion before you get married is the one who usually wins out. Once you have children, your philosophy may very much change. So what you thought might be a problem isn't a problem, or what you thought wouldn't be a problem all of a sudden becomes a problem. And of course, the most obvious answer is talk about it. Why? What evidence do you have that your opinion is the correct one? Did you get it online? Did you get it by Googling? Did you get it from your parents? I have heard so many parents say, well, the reason that I raised my child that way was because, I turned out okay and my parents raised me. And they don't give it any more thought than that. They just, it's a new world. Your children are going to be different than you. You need to really think more about how you're going to raise your children than probably any other time in human history. Just because we're in a brave new world. So talk with your spouse about how you want to raise your kids. Are you going to be careful about what they're going to read, what they're going to watch? Where are you lying on the scale of liberal versus conservative? What are your important memories that you had as a child that you want to pass on to your children? Did you bake things with your mom? Did you have special Christmases? Did you go on special, um, family vacations? What is that? What are you expecting out of this relationship now with children in your life? I think you need to talk about all those things. And I want to to just give you a little bit of de-stress, de-stress a little bit, because here is something I have found to be true. Fairly early on, by at least 2 years old, children can differentiate between father's rules and mother's rules. And as long as they're not moral rules, it's like, let's say mom doesn't like when the kids go and play the drums. That's just too much noise for her. But when dad comes home, kids know, okay, it's time to play drums. We can play. And they can go. And so they realize very quickly dad has certain rules and mom has different rules, and that's okay. Now, morally, you're going to come up with a little bit of different problem. You're going to have a much bigger problem with morals. But one of the biggest issues I want to make about this particular episode is it's okay for your children to see parents disagree. As long as it's not violent, as long as there's no bad words, as long as there's no putting the other person down, as long as it's a good discussion where both people are trying to understand each other and help each other communicate. I think that's kind of important for kids to see on occasion. Even if there's some anger, as long as it's occasionally, I think it's okay. The Lord says, be angry, but don't sin. The more important thing is that children see you and your wife or you and your husband make up. This has been completely lost in our world, is how to reconcile. What has happened in this world is two partners have an absolute clash. They walk away and they just pretend it never happened. They ignore the problem. They don't fix it and they don't reconcile. They just wait for it to blow over. And that is not good for your children. You need your children, and you actually need to help them do this with each other and with you. Go through the process of reconciliation. And what I mean by that is step number one, ask forgiveness. This is a marvelous thing that God gave to us. Ask the person that you've hurt either intentionally or unintentionally, even if it's not your fault. Ask them forgiveness for the hurt and the break in your relationship. And then if you are at fault, be sure and let your children hear this. Oh my goodness. If we could just do this one thing in our relationships, things would be so much better. Because children need to know the world does not fall apart when someone's wrong. If dad or mom are willing to say, you know what? I was wrong. That's going to show your children the best of us can be wrong. That doesn't necessarily take down the respect that the children will have. A lot of parents make this mistake that say, oh, if I say I'm wrong, they're going to lose respect for me. No, 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 no. That's not true. Over time, they will learn to respect you more because it takes, and you can even tell them this, it takes enormous humility and courage to say, you know what, I'm wrong. And all of us are wrong. And most people learn the most when they're wrong and turn and do what is right. Some of the most successful businessmen are those who've gone through bankruptcy several times. They've learned so much from their failures. Showing the process of reconciliation is vital for children to learn how to reconcile. They're not going to learn it unless they see it. And so if you admit that you've been wrong, that gives kids a safe place so they can admit they've been wrong. And of course, I'm Catholic, and so I think that's one of the greatest things about confession is that you have to humble yourself and do some introspection, admit you've been wrong, and then have the courage to go and say to God and say to your fellow man, I made a mistake, and I'm coming in and I admit it, and I ask your forgiveness. Since we don't ever do that, the second part has been lost too. But it's interesting that the second part isn't as lost as the first part because the person will say, I forgive you. Sometimes we say, I forgive you, even if the person doesn't ask your forgiveness. But I think that's also very important when your children argue to go through the process of saying, Johnny, ask your sister for forgiveness. And then make the sister go, Johnny, I forgive you. And even if she doesn't mean it, just say, you know what? Go ahead and say it. And then try to mean it in your heart because you love Johnny. And you want this to be reconciled. And if they see that in the parents, they will see that it works. So make sure you say back to your spouse or that they say to you when you ask them to forgive you, verbalize, I forgive you. It's really awkward at first. It's truly awkward. and then have them see that it really is okay. Don't walk off into separate corners and be kind of snippy towards each other. Hug and say, you know what, I really do forgive you. And then, even if you need to rediscuss it in your bedroom that night, away from your children, if you didn't get it all settled perfectly, and it's not always going to be settled, sometimes you think of things later that you'd like to have said, and that's okay. So just, but your kids got to see what it looked like, and that's so important. Let's see, so go through the process of reconciliation. La, 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 la. So, the most obvious things you can talk to your spouse about once your kids are older is, are you going to spank or not? And I know everyone freaks out. Spanking is so horrible. It's terrible. And it certainly can be. It can be abusive. Um, But this is not what people really anticipate. What happens if you don't spank your children and you don't discipline them is that they irritate you and they don't obey you and they misbehave and you start yelling at them. And that is not any more functional. That is just as dysfunctional as spanking. Yelling goes to your heart. Spanking is quick, and I'm not trying to take over spanking, but spanking is swift. If you're going to spank, it's swift. It gets at the point across and it can be done properly, but don't do it unless you know how to do it. Literally, please don't do it unless you really know what you're doing because you can do damage. But the same thing goes for screaming. I talked about, what we used to call the Walmart mom who would just scream at her kids when she was walking around Walmart. Very dysfunctional. And so you don't want to be that mother or father either. You don't want your children, you want to teach your children not to drive you nuts. And you need to learn how not to be driven nuts by your own children because both of those are wrong. But remember, God has given you 18 years to instruct your children and to make up for mistakes you make and to try new things and to forgive and start over. And children are normally extremely gracious. Parents tend to just kick themselves so hard. My mom used to say that she'd go to sleep so many nights just and not be able to sleep and cry herself to sleep and think, oh, what did I do to hurt my children today as far as emotionally? And children are so forgiving of their parents. And just know you've got a long time. And you know what's even super great is that when your children leave home, and let's just say you made a terrible, terrible mess of parenting, and your child has gotten in trouble, there is a time when your child is, in their 30s, sometimes in their 40s, where you can go back to them and you can ask for forgiveness, and they're going to forgive you. Now, and of course, this is not pie in the sky. I've seen it happen. And sometimes it doesn't happen. And you don't want to depend on that. You want to make sure you're as good a parent as you possibly can while your children are still in your home. And don't depend on the last case scenario. Just like we don't want to have deathbed conversions. We don't want to live a life where we've got lots of regret in how we were with our kids. And so many parents just simply didn't know how to be good parents. So even if you don't listen to anything I say, please think about it and pray about it and become educated and learn from God and be wise. And you can learn wisdom. The Bible tells us we are to seek wisdom. And it is calling for us in the streets. As Catholics have the Book of Wisdom. Protestants have the Book of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes and Song of Solomon. And there's lots of wisdom books in the Protestant Bible. But, wisdom cries out for us. And she wants to teach us. Wisdom is always, well, I'm pretty sure it's always personified as a woman who cries out in the streets to come and seek wisdom. So that is what I have to say today. And just realize none of this came from my brain, or I'm sure I'll tell you. I'll tell you if it's an original thought. But these are things that I've assessed through the years because ever since I was probably 4 years old, I wanted to raise my kids where they would be good kids. And so I've really spent a lot of time doing that. All right. Okay. You have a great day and God bless, and see you next episode.